most of the time in the commercial world, right, in the mainstream world, when we talk about plants, it's talk to your plants, right? It's like everybody talks to plants and they tell you to talk to your plant. But very rarely do you ever hear people talk about listening to your plants.
I'm excited to have you here because I'm honestly most intrigued by when I read your bio and it said that your life, like you had a life-changing event with a musical plant. I am so intrigued to hear this story. I cannot even explain it in words. So we got to start there.
It's a great story. It's such a great story. So to set it all up, I live in a place called Damanhur. It's one of the largest spiritual communities in the world. I call it Hogwarts for adults because that's pretty much what it is. And one day when I was first here, I was walking down a hallway in one of the areas here, and I heard this music. Now you have to understand my background is in music engineering and electrical engineering, and music has always been a super fundamental part of my life. Like, you know how it is, one of those people that just understands the world through the music that she hears and such. And so I heard this music, but it was weird. It was like nothing I really knew. So I followed it, and I ended up at a box that was connected to a speaker, and on the other side was connected to a plant. And it's like, okay. And I kept staring at this plant, and as I'm listening to this music, it was like, are you talking to me? And it was like in that moment, I could see plant for who a plant is, like agency. I could see that this plant had a personality, a way of being, and was expressing this through this music, because we tend to think of music as a language, but it's actually the opposite way around. Language is a type of musicality. And everything for us is rhythm and vibration and tone and intonation and everything. And that's how language gets constructed. So when we're children, right, we hear rhythms and patterns and we make sounds. And this is all the way we start to understand the world. And it was through that music, which in the end I discovered and eventually worked with the music of the plants, which is a device that allows plants to use their electrophysiology. So it's a biofeedback device that allows the plants to make music. So it's a musical instrument for plants. And this really just kind of triggered this plant reawakening. And I've been falling down the rabbit hole ever since.
Wow. It's it's very interesting. And I honestly think it makes a lot of sense that it would be possible, right? Because isn't there like this childhood experiment where you take a potato and you stab some electrodes in it and you can power a radio or whatever.
Absolutely.
That thing is. So this is basically just a different version of that, but instead of powering a radio, you're giving it a speaker and letting it amplify whatever electronics are going through it.
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, our own bodies have a certain amount of electric resistance that comes through, right? In the sense that we have our neurons are firing and such. So we have an electrical system ourselves. The plants, it's just much more acute. It's more developed. I guess that's a better way of saying it. And the interesting part is that when we in Damanhur first started working with the music of the plants device, the goal was really to just understand the plant, right? Give the plant this music, and maybe we can kind of mind read whatever mind means for a plant. But it was when we started to, work with this, where we started to see, musicians that wanted to play along, that the plants were responding. So it was an avenue to open a door that allowed us to start a two-way conversation. Because most of the time in the commercial world, right, in the mainstream world, when we talk about plants, it's talk to your plants, right? King Charles talks to the plants, like everybody talks to plants and they tell you to talk to your plant. But very rarely do you ever hear people talk about listening to your plants. But the plants do communicate back. They just use other mechanisms. They use chemicals like volatile organic compounds that are shot into the air and thrown out for plant to plant communication, but also plant to human communication, because we breathe these in, they land on our skin, we absorb them, and our bodies react to them. It's just usually not a very conscious mechanism. And plus all these other kinds of ways that plants can and do relate to us. the way that they actually even grow is a form of communication back with the natural environment, with ourselves. So this music of the plants allows us to sort of hear it in a way that we would understand more easily, that we're much more attuned to. And it starts to open this two-way conversation piece that then from there, from that piece, we start to expand out into different directions and can start to not just hear a plant, but recognize that we ourselves have a whole series of dormant senses. We have a whole series of other ways that we interact with the natural world because we are beings of nature, and that we have let those atrophy or turn off completely because our conditioning tells us that we have to work on, the words you say and the things you see more than anything else.
Right. So the device that is connected to the plant is almost some sort of translator, if you will, to translate. I'm very simplifying this.
Yeah, please.
The language of plants into the language of humans.
In some ways you could think of it that way. Absolutely. So the device takes this electrical resistance that's coming from the leaf to the roots, and then it passes it through an algorithm. The algorithm looks to map these different signals for that plant onto notes of music. And then as the plant hears these themselves, right, as the plant is also listening, the plant starts to adjust and can understand, okay, if I send out this signal, I'm going to make this note. And so it does give the opportunity for the plant to start to get to know. Way back when I first started working with it, for example, we used to say you had to train a plant for a considerable amount of time. Now there's a lot more, I think, affinity between humans and plants learn much faster. But it's really fascinating because I think all of us that work extensively with this have all kind of like a little signature that when a plant says, oh, I understand, the plant will play this little signature. And it's not something it's not something you train on, like you say, okay, you need to play this, but it's just kind of always happened where you hear this and it's a way of saying, oh, okay, I recognize it. You're ready. I know it all sounds like fantasy, but you got to hear it. And I swear when you hear it, you'll understand.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I guess to try and poke holes in the argument, just,
please,
for the sake of conversation, one might be like, hey, plants don't have ears, they don't have brains. How can they listen and understand and speak? And obviously you probably have a way better answer than me, but to me, I'd almost equate it to, if we can believe in the concept of Wi-Fi or radio signals that we can't see or touch, but they are constantly moving through the air and they are communicating between devices. Yes, your phone has an antenna that's meant to send or receive those. But is it more or less the same sort of thing where we can't hear or see it?
I think you hit the nail on the head in the sense that there's a part of it that is the antennas and the receiver is something that's outside of our normal, what we think of, because obviously since so many animals are similar to us in the sense that they have eyes, for example, to be able to see, we assume that something has to have eyes to see. But just the same as a fly's eye is very different from a human eye, plants have a series of ocelli, which are like basically photoreceptors, because that's really what an eye is, right? An eye is a photoreceptor. And so how do plants make food? They receive the sun. So they have photoreceptors across their entire body. And when you break it down all the way, there are elements of those photoreceptors that are very similar, that have properties that are similar to the way that even the human eye works and the eye of other animals. So there are pieces that are similar, but they just don't take the same shape. The same for like scent. Right? Scent is a chemical signature, and plants do pretty much the majority of their signaling across the entire ecosystem using chemical signatures. They just don't have a nose. So in part, working with a plant gets us out of some of our stereotypical and conditioned responses, because while working with animals already starts to expand your ability to understand and to connect to species and to even think of ourselves, right? Because anybody who plays with a dog for a long period of time will notice that you'll start changing certain habits that are not always 100% human, but because they come from that communication and that connection with the dog. So you're already expanding parts of the way you behave when you're with an animal for a long period of time. You start to smell things differently and experience things differently. But imagine with a plant that has a completely different physiology from the one that we know. And so therefore, as I start to enter into this deeper relationship, my own sense of my body and what I'm able to receive starts to grow and expand from there.
Mm. It's true. You make a great point there. As you're sort of saying that, I'm thinking about, this might sound weird, the relationship that I have with my dog.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll interact, we'll hang out, right? We'll whatever, but he's not speaking to me directly in words.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's probably easier for us to comprehend that he has ears and he has a brain, so he's able to hear and understand things. Whereas we don't make that association with plants. Generally, you think about a plant as just a thing that you put in your garden or put on your desk and just is there.
Right. Yeah, it changes. And it's funny because it helps us better understand, for example, dogs in the wild, like before evolution, some of the evolutions that we've reached to, for example, dogs don't use their eyebrows. You know how we kind of like, there's especially some breeds, we understand kind of how what they're trying to say a little bit because of the way that they use their eyebrows. But the truth of the matter is that dogs don't use their eyebrows. That is something that they developed, that they evolved. It was a coevolution with humanity. Because humans use their eyebrows because that's their expressionism of their eye, and therefore there's a language that comes from that. So over time, some dog breeds especially have been able to really pronounce the use of their eyebrows in order to better communicate with humans. So this is an example of a coevolution that is rapid because of that relationship. And that's exactly what happens with plants. The more I spend time with plants in this coevolutive piece, I start to develop more traits that help me better understand and communicate, as well as the plant does back and forth. And we know, for example, from a scientific perspective, that plants have all the same five senses we do. Plants smell and taste and can see, can hear, and can touch. They also have about another 15 other senses that we as humans don't consider and we don't think about them. Propitiation, right? The sense of being able to know exactly where I am and how I'm oriented in my overall environment. We're not conscious of that kind of sense, but we must have it because we don't fall over. And we kind of know where our arms are if I step and I think about it, or how it is that I'm moving, even though it's very slight moving. Anybody who's ever done Tai Chi knows that all of a sudden when you do Tai Chi, you're like, holy shit, I make all those movements in order to be able to take a step. And all of a sudden, my sense of where I am and the balance of my body and all these pieces starts to become more pronounced. And it's the exact same thing. Plants have all these senses that, understand gravity and understand magnetism and understand all these different conditions. The difference between light and sunlight, which are two different kinds of light, phototropism versus heliotropism. And so we start to see these nuances because the more our relationship with plants evolves, the more nuanced we get about ourselves.
It is mind-blowing.
Yay!
There's so much when you start to consider this as possible, right? Because I think most people don't even think this is in the realm of reality, that you can have a conversation with a plant, right? Even saying it now, having listened to this very valid argument, makes me feel like a little bit like I'm a crazy person. But you do present
lean into your woo. Lean into your woo.
What are the plants trying to tell us? Is the question I want to know, right? Is there a whole thing that we're missing out on that we are just not listening to? What is the conversation like?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, is there something that we're missing out on? Absolutely. Like there's a lot of stuff that we're not listening to. So in part, let me say this thing. I'm not one that says there's a universal message that all the plants are trying to tell you. I mean, I'm sure there probably is, but that's not it. It's more about, first of all, plants have 470 million years on this planet, right? Plus or minus, which means within their bodies, they hold the entire memory of what it means to create environment to create community, to create relationships, to create and to destroy as well. Like all of that. They understand what it takes to create an environment that can be harmonious while still taking into consideration evolution and competition and predation and parasitism and all these different aspects. So there's a lot that a plant can teach us, both in as a mentor and or let me say it an easier way, kind of going from easiest to a little bit more woo, as a model. So just being able to spend time and observe, there's so much for us to learn about what it means to create relationships, to create an ecosystem, a living ecosystem, which could be my own ecosystem with myself, right? Because I'm made up of so many different parts, as well as the ecosystem around me, where nothing is wasted, where everything can be used for something, where we're all growing in different ways. And then there's plants as mentors and, to a certain extent, collaborators. We've disconnected, and some might say that this is actually the original trauma that we all feel, our ability to remember that we are nature. We have all these different abilities that I was just talking about within ourselves. We know how to create with others in harmony. We know our own bodies are only made up of about 10% of human cells. Everything else is, bacteria and virus and all kinds of other aspects, which means we ourselves are a living ecosystem together. So when you start to communicate with a plant, you start to understand that you have a lot more abilities, many more abilities, that you're living in a state of kind of a low-level fear, because probably even an unconscious fear, although some of them are very conscious, of an anxiety and such, because this disconnection means that I no longer feel like I know how to create in the natural world. I think I have to go to the supermarket to get food. I feel like to get shelter, somebody has to build me something. If I don't have those specific skills, then I don't know how to do it. But it's actually not true. It's all inside of us. And so when you start this communication again, we start to recognize where our pieces fit into the overall natural environment. And a lot of the decisions that are so hard for us to make, that are confusing, or that I might not even think I have the ability to do, I recognize that I do have the ability, and that I can, and even if I didn't in this particular moment, the environment is going to teach me. I mean, how many times do we watch, I don't know, television shows or movies, and sometimes even hearing real stories of people that were, I don't know, lost at sea, or that showed up in some kind of like island, and they survive. Why? Because it's all within you. It's all there. And it's the environment that whispers it to you back. It are the plants and all of the other beings that are helping you and supporting you in order to get there. I mean, how else would we find medicine? I mean, seriously, do you really think somebody's walking around in the jungle testing every single plant? They walk in the jungle and all of a sudden something catches their attention, and we discover, different kinds of medicine. And many will say that it's because it's the plants that whisper that to them.
Yeah. Because I think, even just thinking back on it, there's two ways that I would take this conversation from there. Let me start with the first. The first one is, there are a lot of people who prescribe to certain herbal medications, whether it's mushrooms, whether it's whatever else, that are life altering in the sense of it gives them a deeper understanding of themselves, or it sort of connects them to, I hesitate to call it an alternate version of reality, but it almost like taps them into their true power and true potential. I have never had that experience personally, so I can't really speak to it. But
me neither, believe it or not.
Having this conversation, where you start to understand a little bit deeper about the connection, makes a lot of sense. Like I could see why someone would have that experience, and again, haven't tried it, but it does make sense, at least in the logistical terms.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a portion of this that you think really relates back to you and I, are way more capable than we have been sort of trained to believe. Like it's
Absolutely.
through years of evolution and just societal conditioning that we are only able to do these five senses, nothing else. You live in this box, you don't hang out with the fern bush down the block. Like these are not quote unquote normal things in our reality, but maybe they should be. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. If you even just think about it, Homo sapiens are the only species in the class, right? Sapiens are the only ones that exist. And anytime anybody is born with anything that is a different, I don't know, six toes or any kind of other strange to us form or even sometimes abilities. Let's take the conversations about neurodivergence and autism. We tend to label these things as disease. We don't look at them like a curiosity of, wow, could this be humanity and evolution before us? Like, are we seeing ourselves evolve? What if that sixth toe or that extra arm eventually is supposed to help us, do things and into an environment that we have yet to create? We as human beings don't give that the possibility to even exist. We immediately shut it down and we call it disease. But we know that people, for example, who are neurodivergent have extraordinary abilities that are specialized in other areas. And so, what if that's evolution? And in maybe another 50 years, that's going to be a whole new species that can do all these things, much like a tulip might have had one mutation that all of a sudden gave you, instead of straight leaves like you often see, the ones that have the jagged, the petals, excuse me, instead of like the really smooth petals, gave you the jagged petals. And now all of a sudden we have a new species that starts to be identified that has different properties, and that eventually keeps morphing and reconnecting and adapting to the environment. So plants and most species of natural beings start to adapt because the environment adapts, and so it's changing. So there's this little dance that's constantly being played, and some of the levels in the middle might not be so pretty, but they're necessary in order for that evolution to completely happen. And then we end up with new colors, new shapes, new abilities, and all these things. But humans always label that disease and try to eradicate it. So we're constantly holding ourselves back. When a person has the ability to see something that's not visible, we call them psychic. And in maybe a small group, we think that's wonderful. But mainstream society says they're weird. Something is wrong with them. So we shut it down. So all these abilities for us to be able to expand our own senses, we constantly shut down. And so how can we evolve? How would humanity evolve if everything that is different gets labeled as wrong?
Very true. And I guess most of that comes back to our desire to be right, our desire to be comfortable, and shutting out anything that isn't quote unquote normal to us because it makes us feel a type of way.
Yeah.
And we can't sit in that because then everything that we've known our entire lives becomes a little shaky. And for a lot of people, that will wreck you.
Right. Right. And if you think about it from, a butterfly requires requires that worm to actually almost go through a complete disintegration of self, like physical disintegration of self, in order to become and evolve into that butterfly. And like you said, that is the uncomfortableness. But because there's a few things I think that have now been conditioned into us that hold us back from everything you were just saying, which is, one, we don't know our bodies anymore. I mean, physically we can see it and touch it, but I'm saying like that sense of knowing. There are many spiritual paths, for example, or indigenous elders who believe that we have multiple types of minds, right? The instinctual gut mind. And there's science that's starting to back up the idea that there is brain-like functions, in the sense of brain-like processing, let's say it this way, in the gut, physically even. We have an emotional mind, a mind that allows us to understand a world that is super sensitive, that is not sitting on the surface. And then we have a rational mind, right? The what we think of normally from our brain-like functions. But if I don't develop all of these, then I don't really know myself. And if I don't allow my senses to come fully online, then I can't understand the world. But plants being sessile, right, being rooted into the ground, not able to run away, means that they have to have a very detailed understanding of the world around them in order to be safe. Because I've got to know what everything is in order to take it into account and to be able to use it, move with it, protect myself from it, grow with it, any of these different pieces. So one thing that holds us back as humanities to not being able to do the things that you said is the fact that if not knowing myself means I don't feel safe. And so therefore I block everything. And the other part is that we've almost been ingrained not to be curious. We've been ingrained to not explore. If you talk to even the best of the entrepreneurs in the world, they'll tell you that curiosity is key. Curiosity is the thing that makes me grow. And I have to be able to sit, like you said, in that uncomfortable space, but be curious as to where it's going to take me. I have to be present, which is what I call your inner plantness, right? Being like the sessile plant that opens all their sensors and goes off and explores with curiosity, brings that information back in, and then does something with that information. And if we were to recapture these pieces, which science is starting to recognize that the reason why we feel so good in nature when we go out, our cortisol levels drop, our generosity increases, our altruism increases, my sense of health and wellness and like depression starts to lift, all these different things, is the natural awe and wonder I experience. That curiosity that I experience in nature starts to trigger a chemical reaction that calms me down, makes me feel safe, and allows me to open and explore. So it's kind of like this double piece. One, physiologically being in nature and being with nature and being recognizing that I'm like, that I can be in that makes me feel good. And then from that feel good, I start to recognize that the reason I feel good is because I am nature. And therefore, I can expand and grow in that way.
Mm. That does make a lot of sense. I'm not gonna lie. And
yes,
yeah, you're not wrong there. I will tell you, in the beginning of this conversation, like I said, when I first read that life-changing experience with a musical plant, I'm like, very intrigued. And as we're continuing to have this conversation, it's becoming more and more obvious to me that it does make a lot of sense. Like, I can think of examples, at least personally, where, let's say you touch one leaf on a plant and that leaf retracts, and then all of a sudden the rest of the leaves on the entire bush start to retract as well, as if they are connected and communicating with each other. Mm-hmm. They are. That makes sense. When you look at, there are some people who have a strong sense of ESP, or whatever you want to call it. And it's almost eerie how accurate these people are with that. A lot of people will write that off and say, nah, it's just coincidence. But is it coincidence, or is it that this person is using that mind to be able to have that conversation or communicate or listen to these clues that we are just blind to because we choose to be, right? We have, over the course of our lives, tuned it out, where it's not a different reality, but they're listening on another level that we are just deaf to by choice. And I think if you start to consider that, you are way more powerful and more capable than you've ever realized you could be. And once you open your eyes to that possibility, it almost makes you wonder, damn, what can I do?
Right.
Like, and it's a pretty cool and empowering feeling to think that.
Right. Yeah. And what I love about that, speaking as a person who's both experienced it and who has seen so many people experience it in my work, what I love is that it doesn't require any of the kind of, for lack of a better term, mind games that we usually play with ourselves, like play for ourselves or on ourselves in order to get to these things. It's a progression that it's almost like like stepping into comfortable shoes, right? Even though rather than having to break them in, I don't have to break anything in because this is my natural state. So I often tell people, like, when it comes to food or sustainability or regeneration or any of these like hot buzzwords that we talk about today relating to climate change or office dynamics or any of these types of things, this reconnection to nature, like as both outside of myself, but inside of myself as well. First of all, it comes from just a relationship. Like starting a relationship with the plant world is a great way to start to trigger this. But more than anything is all of these other pieces that I was talking about, how my weight, my relationship to health, all these, my understanding of how to maintain the world in a regenerative and sustainable state, all these pieces just naturally start to happen. Not because I'm thinking about it, although I do, of course, our world is made up of things and decisions I have to make and how I evolve into it. But I don't have to convince myself it's the right thing to do. You start to settle into the realization that your body knows this. I often use the example of hunter-gatherers because they're probably the most misunderstood, misunderstood evolutionary phase of humanity, because many people think that hunter-gatherers lived in scarcity and fear. But all of our study is starting to show us that it's completely the opposite. They knew the landscape so well. They were so connected that they could hunt once and then take a month off because they knew where they were going to be hunted next. They knew how to get there. They knew who was going to be there, what I was going to have to do, how much effort it was going to take. They knew where the food was growing throughout the cycle. The deep relationship with nature and their connection into those natural cycles meant that they were allowed to give their bodies those natural cycles too. Rest when it's time to rest. Periods like winter where I'm more dormant and I don't do as much and I reflect. And they were able to sit in deep, deep contemplation, which is where all the myths, they're not really myths, but the legends, let's use this, of the mystic of that experience of being in that, in being and understanding the world through my ability to just experience it in presence. And so when we think about it, we say, oh, well, I don't want to be hunter-gatherers. Sure, okay, I don't want to be sitting around in a loincloth, but dang, wouldn't it feel great to feel like I could just be comfortable and know where my next meal is going to come from? That I don't have to be like chasing work from the perspective of fear, but instead I could be doing it because of the expression that I get when I do my work and enjoying it. Like, wouldn't it be wonderful to once again know that when I step outside my house, regardless of wherever I am, I could find my way home. I knew how to move around. I could understand and be connected to everything around me because I know I love that. Like, and imagine how much more calm we would be about the changes happening in the world if we felt that from deep within ourselves. It just kind of flips the script between, sure, maybe I'll journal because I want to express something, but it's not because I'm feverishly trying to change the way I think about things.
Mm-hmm. So I think that all makes a lot of sense. And what I'm hearing you say there is if we are going to be hunter-gatherers in 2025, we are not hunting and gathering meat and vegetables in the sense, but we are rather trying to get into a flow state.
Exactly.
And I think for anyone who's ever really been in that flow state where things just come easy, that's what we're talking about, right? So it's really trying to get out of your own way and get into a flow state where, hey, you could rest your head easy on the pillow at night because you know exactly what's going to happen in the morning. You know, you have your routine set and you can just very easily flow into the next day. And it's not filled with noise. I think noise is the answer there. I guess the removal of noise and getting into that flow state where it's you're connected to the signal of things, not the noise.
Yep.
Because I feel like a lot of people are operating in this space where we are trying to be so super comfortable in everything, where we're building up this environment around us that is so fake and just built on keeping us in this tiny little comfort zone, we're so disconnected from everything else, and it's actually making it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that might be where the anxiety and the fear and the frustration and the depression is coming from. We are not connected to that feeling of flow, right? Where we're not operating as our authentic self. We're not connected to nature or each other, right? Because is there probably a good element of this, that when you're not feeling that flow and connection, where you're not able to connect to other people as well?
Absolutely. And I think you just described it perfectly, right? That is exactly the essence of it. Because what we're trying to get back to is a state. It's not the actions you take, the actions you trust that are going to come from that state. And that doesn't mean you don't work, you don't create, you don't do things, but the act of doing them is really different. I'll give you an example that just happened to me recently, and that I realized as it was like right at the tail end of it, I was like, like when you get that confirmation that just happens on your body. I had gone to Croatia for because I live in Italy, and I was in Croatia because I was giving some workshops. And when I came back the week later, the organizer of those workshops happened to have been here in Damanhur, where I live. And we sat down and we were having a conversation. And in the conversation, this was a Saturday afternoon. In the conversation, she was like, "Oh, it would be really great. We have this grant proposal we're working on, and we really want you to, do these presentations and stuff. Could you write up grant proposals?" Now, anybody who's ever worked in a grant proposals know that grant proposals are not easy to write. Like, they require so many little details to think through. So she's like, "Oh, I'll have my assistant send you all the paperwork." And she said, but in passing at the very end, she's like, "Yeah, but could you give it to all of us by Monday?" No, by Monday. I think that's what she said. And I was just looking at her, and this was Saturday afternoon. And I had from Sunday afternoon on, I was booked solid. Like, I had a whole series of things that I had to do. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I am going to have to torture myself on Sunday morning to get this done, to give it to her by Monday. So the paperwork arrives, and it's all in Croatian, which means I have to translate it all into English to understand what is necessary and do this. I was like, okay, I'm just going to leave this right now. And I woke up the next morning. It was, Sunday morning. I was like, okay, I'll get to it. And I just started to do a few other things. And at some point I sat on my computer and I opened everything up, got the documents translated and stuff. And I'm looking through this, and I just looked and I said, you know what? This isn't going to happen today. Like, this is not my optimum time. I know my schedule. I know myself. I'm like, this isn't going to work. So I'm like, I know I'm going to do this, because you could feel it. I could feel in my body that I was going to complete it, but I couldn't tell you anything of how. So I said, I closed my computer and I went off and I started to clean my house, and I did, I rested, because Sunday is my rest day. I watched some TV, sat on the balcony and read. Like, I was just like, and then went off my day. Monday morning, I wake up, get my normal morning routine, didn't alter anything from didn't get up early trying to think about this. It was brewing back there in the back of my mind. I sat down on my computer, and in 3 hours, the whole thing just came out. Everything. I wrote 4 new workshops. I had the budgeting process. I had who were the personnel. I was thinking about it for teachers, for students, because it was a plant music based project. So that was training for teachers, training for students, little children at elementary school, high schoolers. Everything just flowed out in 3 hours. And when I finished it, I was like, because this is the time of the day, especially Monday mornings during the week, are my strategic time. It's when my mind processes things and puts things in order. Since I kind of already knew what I wanted to do, because the creative part of it I had done multiple times. So I had the creativity inside of me. I needed that time, which is the strategic time. And in my cycle, that comes right after my morning routine. That's when I'm most creative. When I'm most strategic. 3 hours, it was done. Super effortless. So much so that the assistant wrote me back. She was like, "I don't know how the hell you did it, but I got everything. This is perfect." And I was like, yes.
So yes, it's really about trying to get out of your own way and understand what your specific flow looks like, and,
exactly.
and how to just obey that.
Right. And working with, I often say to people, I'm like, the reason why working with plants is such a great way to do that is because it kind of goes back to the conversation we were having about, the difference between an animal relationship and like a plant relationship is, because plants are so different, when we start working with them, it's kind of almost innocuous. Like I don't feel threatened by working with a plant. Like I don't feel like there's like something that's scary. And so I feel like I'm safe because that's exactly what plants do, right? They create the safe environments in which we live. The most beautiful environments when I'm sitting in a meadow or I'm, out in the middle of a forest and I'm feeling all comfortable and protected are all great. So when I come at it, I step out of my humanness to step into this relationship with plants. And then when I start to understand myself better, I can step back into the human part, feeling more confident and more comfortable. And so it's kind of almost like getting myself out of that conditioning without having to tell myself to get out of the conditioning, because I just step into another environment that is better, that is comfortable and safe. And I can experiment with a whole mess of stuff in there and not think of it as like the real world, the real human world. And then once I'm good there, I come back into it from a different perspective.
So let me ask you two things. Number one is just so I understand this correctly, because what I believe the hypothesis here is that sort of fostering this relationship with a plant allows you to open up the possibility that you can foster these relationships with everything else in your life and live in a flow state. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's not really about having relationships with plants so much as it is about understanding that, hey, this is a really simple interaction you can have as your proof of concept, so to speak. And then once you achieve that, then you're like, hey, I can do anything else.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Perfect.
Okay, cool. So now that I understand that, tactically speaking, for who's listening to the show right now, including myself, I have a plant.
Oh, hi.
Well, hi. How do I start fostering a relationship with this plant? What does my step one look like?
Yeah, okay. So your step one is bring your plant back. Okay, bring your little plant ally back. So your step one, you're almost starting it right there. Adorable. Key is so cute. Hi. So really it's about starting with you. So humans, our dominant sense is the sense of vision. That's our dominant sense. So this is kind of a little bit of a two-way game that you can do. The first one is literally spending time looking at a plant. I'm not talking about just for a second, but like if I spent just 2 minutes, right, looking at a pot plant, right, the plant that's right in front of you, and I start just looking at the stem, the way they grow, the complexity of the way the leaf patterns are, the striations, the veins, the way things are moving. Who's in the soil? For example, I have my plant business partner, Noelle, the Christmas cactus, which is an indoor plant, just grew a mushroom, a parasol mushroom, which is...
Hold on. Time out. I didn't understand that sentence at all. Hit me with that one more time.
So Noelle, the Christmas cactus, who is my plant business partner, just grew a mushroom.
Okay. I'm just going to smile and nod because okay, go for it.
So a few different pieces. One, yes, my business partner is a plant. I've always had a plant business partner since I started my actively working in this field. First, it was Spider Plant, who was for a very, very long time my business partner, who's super chatty. And it's part of the way that we communicate. And then now that baton got passed to Noelle, who's very silent. And it's more about the embodiment part that we've been talking about, like really getting into my body and understanding my other ways of my other minds, pretty much. So there is a type of mushroom called a parasol mushroom that is a mushroom that grows in potted plants. But it's a further kind of proof that relationships are everywhere, even in places where you don't think there are relationships. So when you look at the soil that your pot plant friend, that your plant ally is in, there are relationships growing in there. And so starting with vision helps us expand the way we see, like really thinking about it from that perspective. And then shutting off vision and instead going with your other senses. What does that plant smell like? What does the outside of the pot, what is the soil, what are the leaves, what are the senses that are being stimulated in other ways? What happens when the plant is really far from me or really close from me? What can I touch? By slowly, and you don't have to do this all at once, but by going over the course of a period of time, maybe even give yourself just a week to test it. And every day spend 2 minutes exploring with a different sense. I even have little meditations on Insight Timer as well as my YouTube where you can, to help guide you if you're feeling a little unsure. But just spending those 2 minutes in that relationship starts to open something within you. And then consciously even asking that question, how do I open this relationship? And it'll just start to slowly move things in a different direction, because now you're giving conscious attention to the fact that there's more beyond what it is that you normally experience. You're making time for that presence, like you said, that beingness in the place where I am. And I'm starting to be open that relationship and listen to your body, how your body reacts. Is there something that tingles? Does a memory come in your mind? If you have the opportunity, I highly recommend to all my students and my clients to keep a journal, but that's more of like an art journal, like blank pieces of paper and some kind of drawing materials. It doesn't matter what they are, and just draw. Because when we write, we go back to that whole formula of language that we have, that language has specific understandings and words and stuff. When we draw, all those rules go out the window, and I can now allow my body to express itself without having to worry so much about, don't worry about interpreting it. It doesn't really matter. What's important is that you're getting out of yourself that new form of expression. And over time, it'll start to make sense. It doesn't need to make sense in the moment.
So a lot of that is really sort of shutting up and getting out of your own way.
Yeah. Right? And asking the plant to help. So in this case, you're including the plant because that's what the plant does really well. So rather than feeling alone in having to do it, we know that when we're in nature, we don't really feel alone, right? If I'm immersed in nature, I don't feel alone. So by inviting a plant ally or a plant partner, as I often call them, to help you, you get this kind of double piece. One, the plant actively starts to work. For my own podcast, I interviewed this wonderful medical doctor, which I have to say, when I first met him, I was like, oh, this is not going to work. And then 5 minutes into this conversation, I was like, I was so wrong. He was like a traditional medical doctor who, for different reasons, I ended up on this kind of shamanic journey. And he made a great point that I was like, oh, I love that you just said this. He's like, the medicine that he needed for his own life ended up being a rosemary bush outside his house. And he says, it's not because rosemary has specific properties that helped me. It was in the relationship with rosemary that rosemary and I together developed the properties I needed in order to heal the thing that I was experiencing. And that's exactly what plants do. Plants help us through that relationship understand what it is that is the healing that is necessary. And so by forming this relationship, the plant is starting to learn, because of course they're taking in all your stuff. You're breathing on them, right? You're spitting on them. Like, they're taking everything in, metabolizing it, and then giving it back to you in other ways through chemicals and such. Hence why, for example, terpenes in the air, or right now, they've just came out a study that says that rosemary, going back to rosemary, smelling rosemary will actually trigger memory, like in the sense that it enhances your memory, because the plant brings in human things and then produces what we need.
So should everyone have a plant business partner?
I think so. Personally, I think so. The thing is that you want to hear for the plant who wants to be your business partner. Like, I never chose a spider plant. During COVID, spider plant chose me, and that's another whole story. That's a long one. And at some point, it was spider plant who said, it's my time to go. I want you to work with Noelle. Noelle is not very chatty at all. And so it's been a challenge, and it's been really interesting to learn. But for example, right around me, there's like 20 plants. None of these plants want to be my business partner. It's just Noel. So it's not so much about you selecting, but about opening yourself up to be able to hear it. And let me tell you something. Building a business plan or a program or anything with a plant is a whole different experience, because again, going back to the whole logic is different. I now get into whatever the subject matter that I'm working on in a very, very, very different way. Very, very different way. You get a feeling for what works and what doesn't. You get a deeper understanding from a gut level, from something else that, I'm even still trying to understand how it is. And each one of us needs something slightly different in order to get there. And so a plant business partner really helps to move that. I see it in my clients, the ones that, for example, one of them works with a pilea, and pilea, since she started working with pilea, her business has just expanded in so many different directions. And she sometimes sits there and she's like, how did I get there? And then all of a sudden, like, she'll just turn around and look at pilea. And it's not a mental thing, but all of a sudden she'll look at pilea and she'll be like, oh yeah, you've been to 2 different countries with me across different places. Pilea has been there all along and knows her business just as well as she does. I know it sounds nuts, but trust me, try it and you will figure it out.
All right. I will. I'm always up for trying anything. So I will try. I will have to first come up with a name for my plant. So willing to
when the plant is ready, the plant will give you a name. There's plenty of plants in my house that don't have names, just so you know. I'm not one of those people that goes around and naming. Of the plants that are all around me, only 1, 2, 3, and there's probably like I said, almost 20, and only 3 of them have names. No, 4. Hannah behind you has a name too. 4.
Okay. So I will listen. I'm not even kidding. I'm legitimately going to do this because why not? So I will do that and we'll see what happens.
Yay.
And literally what's the worst thing that happen? I'm sitting in a room talking to a plant. And
keep me posted. I want to hear it all.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for this conversation, which has been very eye-opening. And I got to tell you, it did not disappoint. So thank you tremendously for listening to that plant and speaking with me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been super fun.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you again. Before you go, can I pray for you real quick? Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity, for this day. I want to thank you for our guest. I want to thank you for the person listening to this podcast right now, for waking them up today with breath in their lungs and hope in their heart and placing them here to hear this message, even though it may seem unconventional, even though we may question it because we try to understand it. I ask that we remove that need for understanding and lean into the beauty of everything that you've designed for us, that we stop trying to comprehend and classify every single thing and prejudge every single thing. And we allow ourselves to just bear witness to the beauty of everything around us, that we may open our eyes and open our ears to the conversations going on in the natural world through all things you've created for us, to be able to continue to pursue the plan that you've given to us. And Father, I ask all these things in your name. Amen. Love you.